I'm 34, male. Work in project management. Own a house in a quiet Ohio suburb. Have a 4-year-old daughter, a dog named Biscuit, and until about a year ago, I thought my marriage was just going through a rough patch. My wife and I had been together 9 years, married for 6. She works in software sales, high pressure, long hours, the kind of job where the phone never really goes quiet. About 3 years ago, she got a new work partner, another sales rep who joined her team. A woman who, within a few months, my wife started calling her work wife. I want to be real about how that started. It didn't feel threatening at first. It felt normal. People have close work friends. My wife is intense and driven, and so, apparently, was this woman. They clicked. Fine. Whatever. But then it kept growing. Dinners after conferences that turned into full weekends. Brunches I wasn't invited to. The texts started coming in at 10 p.m. Then 11. Then closer to midnight. My wife's phone screen would tilt away from me when I walked by. Not dramatically, just slightly. Just enough. I'm not a paranoid person. I'm observant. There's a difference. 6 months before any of this blew up, the house next door went on the market. Nice house, bigger yard than ours. I remember thinking I just hoped whoever bought it wasn't the type to have a dog that barks at 6 a.m. I did not anticipate this. The moving truck came on a Saturday in October. I was out front raking leaves when I saw her climb out of the passenger side of a silver SUV. I recognized her immediately. I'd met her twice at company events. Tall, confident, the kind of person who walks into a room like she already made decisions about it. She saw me, smiled, and waved like we were old friends. Small world, she called out. I stood there holding a rake with leaves going everywhere and had a feeling I couldn't name. Low in my chest. The kind that just says, pay attention. I went inside and told my wife. She was making coffee with her back to me. I know, she said. I stopped. You know? She mentioned she was looking in this area. I didn't think she'd actually find something this close. She turned around holding her mug with both hands. Is that a problem? The question was too casual. Practiced casual. Like she'd thought about how to say it. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. I just did. That wasn't what I meant, and she knew it. But she looked at me with this calm, steady expression that I'd been seeing more and more lately, an expression that used to mean she was confident, but recently felt more like a door being gently closed. I told myself to relax. So what if they were neighbors now? My wife needed friends. I was not going to be the insecure husband who made everything into a crisis. But things started stacking up. My wife began going next door after dinner, just for a glass of wine, and coming back at midnight, sometimes later. Our daughter would wake up asking for her, and I'd stand in the doorway telling a 4-year-old that mommy would be home soon. The conversations between my wife and me got shorter, more logistical. Can you grab her from daycare? Did you pay the electric bill? We're out of milk. We stopped sitting together after our daughter went to bed. My wife was either on her phone or out the door. One night at 11:30, our daughter was coughing and asking for her mom. I walked next door and knocked. It took a full minute for anyone to answer. My wife opened it. Hair down, she almost never wears it down at home anymore. Music playing softly inside. 2 wine glasses on the coffee table. She's asking for you? I said. She's been coughing. My wife nodded, grabbed her jacket from the hook by the door, and came home. As I turned to leave, I glanced past her. The work wife was sitting on the couch, legs crossed, watching me. Not uncomfortable, not apologetic, just watching. Like I was a weather event she was waiting to pass. About 3 months in, I stopped pretending and started actually paying attention. I checked our phone plan. It's a shared account. I'm entitled to. The volume of texts between my wife and this woman was extraordinary. Not just frequent. Constant. Morning, noon, late night. Calls lasting 2 and 3 hours on weekdays. I wasn't reading content. But I know what emotional absence looks like, and I know what it means when someone is consistently somewhere else entirely. I brought it up on a Sunday morning when our daughter was at my mother's for the weekend. I need to talk to you about what's happening. My wife set down her coffee. What's happening with what? With us. With her. with whatever this is. She's my friend. She's more than a friend, and you know it. She didn't deny it the way an innocent person denies something. She went very still and said, "You're reading into things because you're insecure." That word, insecure, landed exactly the way it was meant to. For about 10 seconds. Then it made me angrier than I'd been in years. "I'm not insecure," I said. "I'm watching my marriage disappear, and I'm asking you directly what is going on." She stood up. "I need some air." She went next door. At 9 a.m. on a Sunday. She didn't come back for 4 hours. I spent those 4 hours going through our shared email account. I wasn't proud of it. I'd do it again. What I found wasn't dramatic. It was quiet and somehow worse. There were confirmation emails from a hotel in San Francisco. 8 months prior. A sales conference my wife had attended. She'd told me she shared a room with a colleague to save on the company expense report. 2 beds, she'd said. The booking confirmation said 1 room. 1 king bed. I read it 3 times. Then I put the phone down and stared at the wall. When my wife came back, I wasn't explosive. I was past that. I was somewhere colder. "San Francisco," I said. 8 months ago. She stopped in the doorway. 1 king bed. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd heard in years. She didn't lie. I'll give her that much. She sat down across from me and said, "It's complicated." Uncomplicated. She told me it had started as emotional, then became something more during that trip. She said she'd been confused about herself for a long time. She was sorry. She still loved me, but not in the same way, and she'd been trying to figure out how to tell me. And then her work wife bought the house next door, and she knew she needed to make a decision. She just hadn't made it yet. "What decision?" I asked. She looked at the table. "Whether to stay or go." I asked her to go stay next door that night. She did. I sat in the dark in our living room and thought about every moment I'd cataloged and dismissed over the past 2 years. The tilted phone screens. The midnight texts. The dinners I wasn't invited to. The casual way my wife had said, "I know," when I told her who'd moved in next door. She'd known. Not just that her work wife was buying nearby. She'd known what she was choosing. She'd let it all happen right in front of me, within eyeline of my kitchen window, while I made lunches and helped with bedtime routines and assumed my marriage was in a rough patch. That wasn't confusion. That was a slow, deliberate decision made over a long time. 2 weeks later, my wife came back to talk terms. She wanted to keep the house because our daughter was settled in her school district. She said it made more sense for her to stay in the family home and for me to find an apartment. I looked at her like she'd spoken in another language. "You want me to leave my house? It's better for our daughter's stability. I pay the mortgage." "We both pay the mortgage." I called a family law attorney the next morning. Here's what I learned. Ohio is an equitable distribution state. The house, purchased during the marriage, is marital property. Without a prenuptial agreement, neither party has an automatic right to remain in the home. My attorney told me clearly, do not vacate under any circumstances. Voluntary departure can seriously weaken a property claim. I stayed. My wife moved next door. Within a week, she and her work wife were living together openly. Biscuit the dog would trot to the property line and stare toward their house with an expression I deeply related to. And then the work wife started her campaign. She called me directly one evening while I was getting my daughter ready for bed. Said she wanted to have a mature conversation. Said the kindest thing I could do for my daughter was give my wife the house and let them create a stable environment. Said my daughter would still be right next door to me, that I'd see her constantly. "I'm going to stop you there," I said. "Don't call me again." She called twice more that week. Both times I let it go to voicemail. Both times she said some version of the same thing. I was making this harder than it needed to be. I was being selfish. My daughter deserved a home that wasn't full of conflict. Each voicemail had this studied reasonableness to it that made my jaw tighten. When that didn't work, she called my mother. I still don't know how she got that number. My mother called me genuinely flustered, saying this woman had told her I was refusing to cooperate with a custody arrangement and that my daughter was suffering because of my stubbornness. I spent an hour reassuring my 61-year-old mother that there was no custody arrangement yet, We were 6 weeks into the process, and that I had not abandoned my daughter or blocked anything fair. Then the work wife went to the neighbors. Not all of them, just the ones who talked the most. Within 2 weeks, a neighbor I'd barely spoken to knocked on my door and gently suggested that sometimes it's best to let things go peacefully. She had recruited my own social environment to pressure me out of my house. I documented every call, every voicemail. I sent my attorney a full written account with dates, times, and content. He told me this pattern of contact and third-party pressure could be raised in proceedings and potentially characterized as harassment under Ohio law. I told him to note everything. My attorney filed the divorce petition in November. My wife retained her own counsel. At the temporary orders hearing, which determines who lives where and what financial arrangements hold during the divorce process, my wife's attorney argued that because the work wife owned the adjacent property and my wife had been residing there for several weeks, the marital home should be released to me, since my wife had effectively established alternative housing. Her own attorney's argument gave me the house during the divorce. I watched him realize the miscalculation about 30 seconds after making it. Temporary order. I retained occupancy. My wife had scheduled parenting time, which she exercised consistently. Whatever else was true, she showed up for our daughter. I never blocked that. I want to be clear about that because it matters. But the work wife was not done. In December, I got a call from my employer's HR department. An anonymous complaint had been submitted suggesting I was distracted and performing poorly, and that a colleague had expressed concerns about my mental stability during a difficult personal period. My manager, a decent man who'd known me for 6 years, told me privately before anything was formalized. I knew who it was. Couldn't prove it, but I knew. I requested the complaint be documented formally in writing and placed in my file, and responded in writing that I was undergoing a divorce and had maintained full performance throughout, which my quarterly reviews confirmed. The complaint went nowhere, but someone had tried to destabilize my job during the most vulnerable period of my adult life. That was the moment I stopped playing defense. I had my attorney send a formal cease and desist letter to the work wife, not aggressive, just surgical. It stated that any further direct contact from her regarding my divorce proceedings, my property, or my parenting arrangements would be pursued as harassment under Ohio Revised Code. The calls stopped immediately. I had my mother write out in her own words exactly what the work wife had said to her on the phone. Signed and dated. My attorney added it to the file. I spoke to the neighbors she'd contacted, calmly and factually. I told them the truth about the timeline, the hotel booking, the direct pressure campaign. People who had known me for years made their own judgments. Then came the piece that changed the financial picture entirely. During asset discovery, both parties are required to submit full financial disclosure. Standard procedure. In reviewing my wife's submission, my attorney noticed a lump sum transfer of $14,000 from the work wife into a joint account she and my wife had opened, 2 months before my wife came to me with her "let's talk terms" conversation. The transfer had not been included in my wife's initial financial summary. Under Ohio law, all assets and financial transfers must be fully disclosed during divorce proceedings. Failing to disclose funds received, regardless of how they're characterized, is a serious procedural violation. My attorney filed a motion to compel full financial disclosure and flagged the transfer to the court. The judge was not pleased. My wife's attorney attempted to characterize the $14,000 as a personal gift, not an asset. The judge ordered full accounting of the transfer regardless of characterization. The narrative that my wife needed the house for financial stability weakened significantly once an undisclosed 5-figure infusion from her new partner entered the record. Then the work wife made her worst mistake. She showed up at my daughter's daycare during my scheduled pickup time, not my wife's, and tried to introduce herself to the director as my daughter's future step-parent, asking about the policy for adding a second emergency contact. The director called me. She was uncomfortable. She didn't add the contact. I had my attorney draft a motion requesting the court issue a parenting parameter defining who may pick up my daughter, communicate with her school or medical providers, or represent themselves as a parental figure before any such designation was legally established. The judge granted a modified version of the order. No third party could represent themselves as a parental figure to my daughter without consent from both legal parents. It went into the record. Every overreach left a mark. Every mark went into the file. The divorce was finalized 7 months after I filed. Standard Ohio timeline for a contested dissolution. Equitable distribution meant a court-ordered sale if neither party bought the other out. I made an offer to buy my wife out at fair market assessment. My attorney filed the motion. The court approved it. My wife received her equitable share in cash. She moved fully into the work-wife's house next door. I kept the house. 50-50 shared parenting was established, standard Ohio schedule, week on week off, with provisions for holidays and school breaks. The work wife was explicitly excluded from school communications and medical decisions unless and until a proper legal step-parent proceeding was filed, a direct result of the daycare incident. Every move the work wife had made, the phone calls, the neighbor campaign, the anonymous HR complaint, the daycare visit, had been documented, responded to formally, and used against her in a process she had badly underestimated. She'd walked into my life like she already owned the furniture. She found out the furniture wasn't hers. About 4 months after the divorce was finalized, I was in the backyard with my daughter when she looked over the fence and asked me why the neighbors were fighting. I could hear them. Not clearly, but the pattern was recognizable. Raised voices. Then silence. Then a door. The pregnancy the work wife had announced on Instagram with a cheerful ultrasound post, tagged "Our Little Miracle," turned out to be from a relationship that had overlapped with the beginning of her relationship with my wife. My wife had believed the pregnancy was something they'd planned together. It wasn't. The neighborhood found out in pieces, the way neighborhoods do. I said nothing to anyone. I didn't need to. About 8 months after the divorce, my wife knocked on my door one evening after our daughter was asleep. She looked older than I'd seen her look in years. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know that doesn't fix anything." "No," I said. "It doesn't." She wasn't who I thought she was. I leaned against the doorframe. I thought about the hotel booking, the tilted phone screen. For years of distance I'd tried to fix like a leaky faucet. "I know the feeling," I said. I didn't let her in. I told her whatever she was processing, she should do it with a therapist first. She nodded and left. She did get a therapist. She told me that during one of our daughter's handoffs, not looking for credit, just stating it. I respected that. We became functional co-parents. Not friends. Not enemies. The kind of adults who can sit in the same row at a preschool graduation without the air going toxic because a small person in a paper graduation cap is looking for both their faces in the crowd. That matters more to me than any of the rest of it. I repainted the front porch that summer. My daughter helped, which means there are small green handprints on the railing that I left there on purpose. My house. Still standing. Still mine. If you read all the way to the green handprints on the railing, you clearly have the emotional stamina for whatever comes next. So subscribe because I've got more stories, and the next one involves my mother-in-law, a storage unit, and a level of audacity that honestly deserves its own post.